It's an honor to introduce Wade Troxell, the mayor of Fort Collins, Colorado. And he's going to talk about this initiative in his city. Take it away, Wade.
Thank you, Gavin. Thank you all for inviting me to be a part of this virtual conference. I think it's an exciting format and very useful, I think, in way to communicate, particularly in today's times. It's my honor to talk about our community, Fort Collins, Colorado. We're located along the Front Range of the Rocky Mountains, just north of Denver, about 60 miles. We're the fourth largest city in Colorado, about 175,000 people. And my what I'm going to be doing today is really talking about our journey in becoming a connected city. And hopefully it's useful in terms of telling the story about our journey. But I think regardless of the journey part of it, you know, it's incumbent upon us now to really be thinking about how we are a connected community in so many ways, including the technology, and particularly as it relates to our physical assets and being able to engage with that. Thank you. So, and becoming a connected community, you know, I'd be remiss not to put it into context. Just the end of January, we had our State of the City, and talking about our community 365 days a year and everything that touches our community with regards to our municipal services. And one of those is broadband. But one of the things we didn't talk about that was COVID-19 and the virus and the impact. And I think that is particularly relevant now, not only because it's so obvious in our daily lives, but I think it's so necessary now as we think about connectivity. Here's a newspaper article that was in our local paper in the middle of April, and it was talking about how necessary it is for being connected. And it talks about the quote on the right talks about how we haven't experienced any performance issues, and we have a robust 10 gig network. And this is we're in a competitive space with two incumbent providers with our broadband. This is, I think, a point that as we move to the future is internet accessibility is a necessity for everybody in their everyday lives, and our need for ubiquitous high-speed internet connectivity. And we're providing that for all of our residents, all of our businesses in the city of Fort Collins. And as we build out our broadband utility, you know, and again, in these pandemic times, I think we can reflect upon municipal utilities and how they've come about in previous eras. And broadband, I think, is so much relevant today and well into the future. Providing a little bit of context about Fort Collins, I mentioned we're 175,000 people. We're a home to Colorado State University with a lot of high-tech companies, including Intel and HP and Broadcom and NVIDIA, as well as some aerospace companies such as Woodward. And so we have a high-tech industry. We also have a lot of breweries and other sorts of process industries, including large breweries such as Budweiser. Fort Collins was featured in 2010s in the Smithsonian, in the U.S. Museum of American History, as a place of invention. Fort Collins was the only city in current times, because the other 5 cities in the exhibit in Washington, D.C. were in the past. Hartford, Connecticut in the 1880s around manufacturing innovation, or Silicon Valley in the 1960s around semiconductors, or Bronx in the 1990s around hip hop and its influence, and then Fort Collins in the 2010s around clean, renewable energy. And it's kind of the spirit of Fort Collins, being an innovation community, a place of invention that sets the context, I think, for the broadband utility as it's being rolled out. Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan once said, if you want a great city, create a great university and wait, he said, 200 years. Well, we're having the 150th year of Colorado State University right now. And I point this out because our universities are key assets within our community. And that's one of the things that we help build upon within Fort Collins as an innovation community. Here is at our State of the City address, which we held on our Colorado State University campus and celebrating the 150th year. But in talking about the 150 years, and this begins to sharpen the point on the impact of COVID at Colorado State University. This was an announcement of classes moving online at the end of March. And when you think of how that move, going from person to online learning for over 32,000 students, and many were in place wherever their homes were, or some here in Fort Collins, but in other places. And this is true where you are, as schools, K through 12, as well as higher education, have gone online. And that's only the beginning of the many things, as you've probably adapted your lives to virtualization and much like this conference. And being a university city, I just want to talk about it. Colorado State University as a durable partner and providing a lot of resources to the community in ways that help to make it so robust. Colorado State University being a Research One university, being connected to the nationwide broadband network at the research universities that rolled out in the 1970s and 1980s. And so being a key asset in the partnership as we developed our broadband utility. It's a key partner in terms of thought leading and think tanks and the vision, and that plays into the role of how we ended up with our broadband utility. The university is also an important neutral convener to bring people together for difficult conversations that we might have within our community. And also they're a key partner in co-creation of new innovations and so forth. So I point out Colorado State University in partnership with the city and the municipality, but also with our private sector. And so when you begin to align the private sector, the public sector, and the research university, you really have, and you gain the alignment of all three together, pulling the rope in the same direction, so to speak. You really build some strong assets within your community. And that's what happened with us with regards to the broadband utility. Thinking about the future and future-proofing our city is how do you, and these are words that we're all using today, being a smart and connected city, but really how do you create the flexibility, the adaptability, and resilience now and for the future, really driving and managing technological change and increasing the opportunity for development opportunities within our communities, and improving the business services performance effectiveness, and contributing to generally the high quality of life that makes our communities a desirable place to live, work, and play. And enhancing the community, providing support for the creative class, and enhancing technology for education, whether again it's K through 12 or whether it's higher education, and improving the flexibility for remote work environments and for businesses, and providing a platform for smart city adoption of of IT and automation and machine learning and Internet of Things, all this really points to a broadband utility. And now to put some more context on the background in Fort Collins. Fort Collins, we have our electric utility, which is a distribution utility that partners with 3 other communities in Platte River Power Authority. And that's a key asset because about 30 years ago began to lay fiber that connected the 4 communities for the electric utility communications between the 4 cities, and a ring around each of the cities for communications. And that was done a long time ago. Fort Collins has as I mentioned, electric utility. We're a full service municipality with 5 utilities: water, wastewater, stormwater, electric, and broadband. And to put that into context, our water utility was formed in 1882 when there was some fires that created the necessity to deliver water timely to our small community at the time. And that's when the first water treatment facility was created, and our water utility was created. Our electric utility was formed in 1935, and we generated within our own community, and now we partner with Platte River, and we're over 50% renewable at this point and growing. We have commitment to 100% renewable by 2030, and aggressive goals there. And all this, I think, plays together for being a connected city. An important decision that was made in 1969 by the city council at the time was to underground our electric system. So Fort Collins is one of the few electric systems that's 99.99% undergrounded. And I mentioned that because, well, that's quite a commitment. It's hard to even after a hurricane or a flood or another natural disaster, when the electric system is taken out, usually it's rebuilt with poles above ground and so forth. Some of the ancillary benefits that have come from the undergrounding is not only a highly reliable electric system. When a storm goes through today, heavy snowstorm in the spring, or high winds, we don't talk about outages with the electric system because of the undergrounding. But there's also other benefits such as view sheds and safety. So you go to our low-income neighborhoods or our old town, and you're not looking through power lines. And one of the comments that people make when they visit Fort Collins is how clean everything looks, and that's because of the undergrounded nature of the electric system. And with their deployment of our broadband, that will be undergrounded as well. And I also mentioned the electric system because one of the assets when considering doing broadband was the partnership with the electric system and the other utilities for co-location and dig once kind of policies and things like that provides for the rollout of the broadband utility. Thinking of, I've been on council for 13 years, since 2007. I've been the mayor the last 5 years. But thinking back to 2011, I've chaired the Futures Committee of the Fort Collins City Council. It's a subcommittee of the council. And the Futures Committee, actually it's one of the my favorite assignments, and that is we think about aspects of our future. There aren't items that we're currently discussing or on our radar as city council, but we are able to lift our heads up and look at the horizon, as to what are some issues or some ideas that we should be thinking about, that we should be moving towards. And we bring in thought leaders from around the world within our own community to actually provide a presentation. Then we have a robust discussion around it. back in 2011 at our Futures Committee, we had the question, what does it mean to be a connected city into the future? And we invited our incumbent providers, there are two incumbent providers in Fort Collins, to share with us what they saw as being a connected city into the future and their plans for Fort Collins to be that connected city. And with the university and with our high-tech industry and so forth, we felt that it's important that those the questions be addressed, and looking forward to the comments that were coming from our incumbent broadband providers. And the response was rather startling, because they said their future wasn't going to be in infrastructure, it was going to be in programming. So what was riding over the broadband? And we made us pause and think hard about, if we're not a connected city or moving in that direction, what should we do? The other thing that became apparent in our conversations is really the lack of customer service. One of the things that Fort Collins, through our electric utility, our water utility, our wastewater, stormwater, is excellent customer service. The customer approval and support is very high. And so we have strong customer support with regards to our utilities. In comparison to our broadband providers that you usually get bounced around to various call centers, and oftentimes your question really isn't addressed in a timely and meaningful manner. And so so there was that concept. And then the further conversation that we had with regards to the public good and being a connected city and well into the future. And so looking at the timeline of a broadband, I'll quickly go through this. Colorado has a bill that was passed in 2005 called SB 152, which actually limits municipalities from pursuing any related broadband service. And it was a protective measure for broadband providers at the time. Well, since 2005, over 100 cities have taken to the ballot and have passed, without exception, the ability to to pursue broadband within their communities. And so, Fort Collins did that with a vote in 2015, where our voters opted out of SB 152. Back in 2010, at the time, Google provided a fiber challenge where they were going to provide some Gig U communities. They looked at Fort Collins. We partnered with CSU to look at Gig U. And frankly, because we were undergrounded, Google at the time went with other communities that had above ground poles to string their fiber. And so, but that Gig U discussion and the engagement with Colorado State University, and one of my former mentors that I'm on the faculty at Colorado State University. And so, but that relationship with Colorado State University was key in our early discussions that led to that Futures Committee discussion with the incumbents about their plans for broadband in Fort Collins. Basically, coming out of the Futures Committee and what does it mean to be a connected city, our strategic planning process started to incorporate broadband into our future. We saw that in our strategic plan of 2014. I mentioned the opting out of Senate Bill 152 in 2015. In 2016 was the strategic plan adopting broadband in Fort Collins. In 2017, Fort Collins voters approved and authorized the City Council to pursue broadband services. And we started with the budget in 2018 with appropriating $1.8 million to move forward in some initial planning and pursuing what does it mean to have broadband services within our community. We actively pursued public-private partnerships in this. We got fairly far along with one provider, and the challenge and what essentially broke down those conversations was the provider wanted us to take the risk and a disproportionate amount of the risk in rolling out the broadband, and so those negotiations broke down, and then we began to pursue a municipal broadband utility. So back in 2018, we City Council authorized bonding for $140 million to begin to deployment of our broadband, and built our brand, which is Fort Collins Connection, which is our broadband utility, which is in a competitive space with the two incumbent utilities. And our groundbreaking, it was in February of 2019, and our official launch and our customer was almost 1 year ago in July of 2019. And it's about a 3.5-year rollout. We expect completion of our broadband utility in 2023 with a take rate we expect over 50% within our community. So what does it mean to think about your broadband and building on the legacy that of the issues that are important to our community? Well, first of all, we're very eco-friendly community, and it provides a low power communications throughout our community. So it has that inherent built in. I've talked about our customer service through our utilities, and we extend that high level of customer service through our connection broadband with unbeatable 1 to 10 gig. Our initial offerings are 1 gig service to all. We don't differentiate between different kinds of customers. Basically, we're providing a 1 gig premium service and a great customer experience, building off of that that we've been doing within our utilities, our electric utility. It's very cost effective and in meeting not only the technology today. The fiber is the key component, and we can keep upgrading the technology and expanding that well into the future. And so it's an infrastructure, much like we think of pipes for the water and wastewater, the infrastructure for our stormwater, the wires for our electric, and now glass for the fiber throughout our community. Some of our guiding principles in rolling out the broadband. One is net neutrality, and this is a commitment that we made as a community. Whereas our incumbents basically dial up and dial down services. I'll just share one of our council members on a virtual meeting yesterday talked about how talked to the incumbent, and they dialed up her speed, but basically they're limited in the technology. Our two incumbents are at the end of their technology roadmap of what they're able to do within our community, and that's an important point of that we thought about future-proofing our community, is that their technology doesn't scale to the future. They're at the end of their technology. They're adding elements that are trying to extend it, and they try to bit share it, or do fiber neighborhoods, or do things that actually limit to somebody else while they turn up somebody else. And so one of the commitments that we made is net neutrality, where services are not blocked, they're not slowed down, they're not sped up, they're not manipulated based on who's accessing the internet and from where within our community. Privacy security is a key aspect of this, and building off our utilities, our electric utility, a lot of the cybersecurity aspects are built into our city operations. And so the city is very service sensitive to the privacy of our customers, and committed to protecting their personal identifiable information. And we're building upon our practices of our utilities in doing so. And we're committed to future-proof for the future of our fiber network, all fiber, state-of-the-art, and meeting current and future needs of our community. And finally, just providing excellence in terms of customer service and committing to that in terms of product and services, and that's playing out now as we roll out. And I mentioned that we're undergrounding, so we're literally digging up every yard in Fort Collins and delivering the broadband to our community, to every physical premise in Fort Collins, about 65,000 premises that we're connecting to. One of the ways that we're currently deploying right now is through contract construction. It's a rolling design build approach with 90 days for design through to construction. As I mentioned, about 2.5, 3-year timeline. Our first customers signed up in the third quarter of 2019. And we're adding crews now during COVID, but one of the essential services in construction, we're adding crews to expedite the construction as best we can. And we continually to open up our new neighborhoods for service weekly, and we sign up new customers daily. So that's in our current operational sense of where we are. And considering the rollout, there's a variety of criteria that we've used to determine our future locations. Actually, as the mayor, I'm not privy to where they're going next. I'm still using one of our incumbent providers, but basically, as connection rolls out, they're looking at density, how fast people can get set up. The premise type, whether single family or multiple dwelling units, businesses, the accessibility, the ease to build, the availability of conduit, and the boring and trenching, other physical infrastructure like railroads or ditches plays into that, and as we make decisions of our rollout. The cost to build, we have $140 million, and we're on track with regards to our budget to meet the build out, but keeping our eye on the costs of that. The demographics and serving everyone. Right now, one of our major efforts during the COVID is there's 9 mobile home parks within Fort Collins, and those students, K through 12 students, are studying at home, and many of which don't have broadband services to those neighborhoods. And so we're actually specifically providing wireless service to our mobile home parks to help those underserved and low-income people of our community. And that's an important part of the equitable inclusion as values that we have in our community for the rollout. So those are just some items that we consider in terms of rollout. And it's fun to watch the excitement, the anticipation. You can't get it to us soon enough kind of discussions that we have. But the way that it typically happens is signs show up within the neighborhood. Next door is a great social network that helps the communication. The branding, where we have the contractors, but they carry on the branding of connection as an approved contractor. And you can see on the right is one of the things that we hear about a lot is they received a door hanger, meaning that broadband is coming to their neighborhood, and the build out happens there. There's also a commitment to our community in terms of communication. In our first quarterly report, in terms of what people should expect in the neighborhoods as it's rolling out, the kinds of speeds, costs, and so forth. We're providing a cost of $59.95 for gigabit symmetric service to every premise. And so, now as we move to video conferencing, you begin to see the necessity for symmetry. A lot of our incumbents are built on high download speeds and not high upload speeds. In video conferencing, you have a bilateral requirement for upload. Your video and audio is as essential as your downloading speeds. And so that's one of the things we begin to see in the breakdown of incumbent providers is their upload speeds are usually a 10th to 100th less than their upload speeds. We are offering gigabit services, which is 100 times to 1,000 times faster than our incumbent technology. And being 100 or 1,000 times faster, they're at the end of their technological roadmap, where we're at the beginning providing fiber, which is light, which is you know, the transmission of digital data at its fastest capacity rather than at copper speeds. So our commitment to communications with is a big part of what Fort Collins does. And with that, that ends the presentation that I have. And I'd be glad to talk to anyone about your experiences, your questions, what you would like to do going forward. And with that, I'll turn it back to Gavin.
Thanks, Wade. A great presentation. Of course, we talked earlier. I find it fascinating because our community here is looking exactly what you did. But you had that plus of you know, the underground power to start with, and I know that there's underground was frowned upon because of power loss, but there's trade-offs. So there's no questions in the Q&A box yet. I encourage people to put those in now. This is a great time to catch Wade because, as I understand, you have to go off to some meetings soon. But I got a few questions. In the urbanized areas, was the electric put in like utilidors, or was it just direct bury power?
It was through direct bury to the buildings, and then, you know, through basically the age of the building and how that was done there. But you know, basically it was through the street right-of-ways and so forth that provided the distribution of the power. Now, you know, we have actually, I think that's an important point as well. When we first undergrounded, all the technology for the electric side wasn't available then. It had to be invented. And so that was an important part of what happened was the neighborhood vaults had to be invented that actually allowed for the distribution to each house in the neighborhoods and the business quarters and so forth. And those were invented as a, you know, that followed the decision to do the undergrounding. I think that's an important part too, is sometimes you have to create those things that you need in order to roll out in the electric utility and now the broadband. We're, you know, we're doing a similar thing on the broadband as it grows into a neighborhood. To each premise, there's a so-called flower pot. And then when someone signs up for the service, it's connected to their premise and all the necessary modem and technology inside is provided. We're bundling some initial services to basically allow for certain customers to have what they normally have, whether it's a basic bundled service with some programming and local channels. But what we're finding is people want the big pipe, and they're running their essential services over the top that they choose, whether it's Hulu or Netflix or Amazon Prime or what have you. So that's you know, the innovation part is an important part of, I think, the rollout.
Okay, so we have about 10 minutes more for questions. We're going to start the next session at 11:45 sharp, but we've got some questions from the audience, and this is a good one. with Fort Collins kind of being on a tech boom now, with HP moving in and others, and you're going to be this wired city. Here's a question from Tom B. He's a surveyor in Washington State. He says, does Fort Collins have a digital twin? And if so, I mean, are you working on one? If so, what applications are used to track, manage infrastructure development and planning?
Okay, I don't think I know what a digital twin is meant by that. But so any illumination on that would be appropriate. You know, when you first asking the question, I was thinking of Longmont, a neighboring community, was a pioneer in some of their broadband and a twin in that regard. They have a take rate of about 50-some%, we work closely. We're looking at some shared customer service aspects to that. What was the second part of that question, Gavin?
The second part is what applications are you using to like track and manage infrastructure and do the planning process?
Okay, and I'm not the one on the operational side to know the what applications are being used for asset management and tracking, but I can get that information by and I can follow up on that.
Yeah, a note to the attendees in the guide. There's links to be able to set up virtual meetings, and I think Mayor Troxell could put you in touch with someone at the city of Fort Collins that could answer that. We have another question from Gary C. What are the challenges to determine which sectors get covered by the new infrastructure? And the second part of the question is, how do you weigh the public and private good dilemma?
You know, the rolling out, we're not making a distinction between business or residential. Most of the premises are by numbers on the residential side and multi-dwelling units and businesses. One of the principal rollout was really to every premise, and the voting public is really you know, mostly residential. But one of the things we are finding that businesses, whether or not we're their primary provider or their secondary backup provider, there's great interest from all of our businesses for the broadband connectivity. And then the public-private dilemma, that was an important discussion within our community. I think there was a bias towards a private sector provider. But I think by the active discussions that we've had within our community with regards to the ability to meet the future, copper versus fiber, and where we were going, you know, passed with a 82. Actually, the initial vote was 82%. In favor to pursue broadband as a municipal utility, and then it was 56% passed with regards to a municipal utility. So there was broad support within our community to pursue it as a municipal utility, and we had an active conversation. And as I mentioned in the presentation, that we were pursuing a public-private partnership until it appeared that you know, that the balance between the risk and the reward in that conversation, and that was all part of our public deliberation.
Okay, thank you. We have time for this next question from Eric C. How did the installation affect your infrastructure? I can imagine that putting new utilities in the ground probably tested the quality of the records you had for what was already in there. But Eric wants to know, were there impacts to your infrastructure?
Yes, I think there's always surprises, and there have been some where you know, might have hit a water line that wasn't anticipated. We're in people's yards where a lot of their sprinkling systems and things like that are there. But you know, I think within our arterials and in the conduit and placing more conduit, I think, and working closely with all utilities in that I think you can always do better in terms of your asset mapping. I think that draws a sharper point on that within our community. But for the most part, and we're using a lot more boring technologies, and the contractor is doing that. Actually, the technology has improved with regards to a lot of the undergrounding, boring and so forth, and clearly that's important, and monitoring the boring and so forth. So there have been some conflicts, but for the most part, it's been positive, and a lot of that is again the community outreach, and when we're in neighborhoods and communicating that when we're in the neighborhoods, but also working with the utility team in the deployment.
And I'm assuming that the contractors are providing very detailed as-builts as to where they're putting the fiber. You know, working in construction for years, one of our greatest fears was cutting a fiber line. We'll get more people angry if that happens than any other utility. So hopefully they're providing very detailed maps, maybe field mapping with GNSS or something like that.
Right, and I can follow up on that one, but I think the as-built is an important either verification or a correction to the data that is in place. So that's a critical component to the build out as well.
Okay, and I'll end with a very typical stock answer. What was the biggest lesson you learned? The thing that you would have done different?
You know, I think the biggest lesson is, I think is to keep your eye on the horizon of where you're going. I think this issue in particular, we didn't want to compete with private enterprise and the incumbents, but the long-term conversation that we had made it clear that our future wasn't where they were necessarily heading. So keep your head up, head towards the horizon. And I think if anything is truer today than ever, and that is our future really depends upon being connected and having robust connectivity, having a big pipe, symmetric for all. And so, it's an equity issue, it's an inclusion issue, it's a business necessity issue, it's a education issue. All these things do play into being a connected city. And so, that's the fundamental question. And in getting back to keep your eyes on the horizon to the outcome for that will be necessary well into the future.
All right, thank you very much, Mayor.